Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. We're going to get right to the show after these messages.
Hi, this is Cassandra Lane. I'm the author of We Are Bridges, a memoir. You're listening to Mysterious Goings On with Alex Greenwood.
It was June of 2020 when we first welcomed today's guest to the show, and he was coming on to talk about his new book. And all you need is more love, and it did really well. It was the Caroline Street Press book, and it was just my pleasure to work with Bob on it and to have him on the show. And now we're welcoming Bob Hill back to Mysterious Goings On with the follow-up, which is Life is to be Celebrated, Selected Sermons and Messages for the 21st Century. And I've got plenty of questions for Bob, but first I'll let him say hello. Bob, welcome back to Mysterious Goings On.
Hey, great to be with you. Always good to be with you, Alex. Love your show. Love what you do in media. Love how you take care of your clients and all the rest. But just, it's always, it's nice to hang out with interesting people that help you live life a lot better. And you're one of those people.
Oh, you were very kind. Thank you. And I appreciate that. And it's funny because that's what you have done for 30 plus years. You're still doing today. I mean, you were a minister at Community Christian Church in Kansas City. By the way, folks, if you're not from Kansas City, it's one of the most elegant, incredible looking churches. It was a Frank Lloyd Wright design. It's just gorgeous. It's on the legendary Plaza area. Check it out. But Bob is now, you've used, I'll use the word because you've used the word. You're semi-retired. You're no longer,
semi-retired.
You're not, but you're still out there preaching the word, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I just did 2 preaching gigs this last month, and I have more coming up in the new year. But my main work is as a consultant with the Kauffman Foundation, with a focus on community engagement with public education. But, I write and preach and write some poetry and write essays and the like, and still engage in trying to do something to move the needle forward toward the goodness of the human prospect.
I've said this to you. It's nothing I haven't said to you in private. We had lunch recently, but I'll say it again, is that I've always admired your ability to be strongly positive, and I'll explain that in a moment, and a living affirmation of the good that is in humanity and the good that is in this world, particularly when a lot of us gloomy gusses find it difficult to keep being strong and positive. I'd just like to ask you, Bob, is before we talk more about the book itself, where do you, I think I know where you get it, but I'll ask you anyway, where do you get this strength? Where do you get this ability to say, yeah, things are not optimal, perhaps here, and here, but I still believe things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
We have somewhere to go in this world.
Sure. One, it's a matter of logic and practicality. If negativity worked, the world would be perfect by now, wouldn't it? So I opt for the positive because it feels a lot better, just personally and individually. It almost always is experienced better in the community in terms of a cohesion, and also in terms of the prospects for enjoyment in a community, however small or big. We all know what it is to be around people that are sour. We understand what it means to kind of participate in toxicity ourselves. And when we let it out, just recently I corrected myself in a conversation with a friend. I said, yeah, I kind of wish that too. It was wishing a bad thing to happen to somebody. I mean, we all do this privately. I was confessing it. He was confessing it to me. And I said, that doesn't get us very far, does it? It almost always backfires on us, and it sours our insides. So to sweeten the inside, to make ourselves breathe a little bit more easily and more freely, and then also to really know that we were meant for joy. St. Augustine said that the glory of God is a human being fully alive. The best way to be fully alive is to be filled with joy and pushing toward the positive.
Can I confess something to you? I am working, we all are a work in progress, I believe. You would agree?
Yeah, oh gosh, yes.
I am working on something, and I think we touched on it briefly at our lunch recently, but I am working on grace, on establishing a better sense of grace within myself, within my own heart. And I'll explain really quickly for the listeners. What I'm talking about is that there are definitely things going on in the world, in this country, that have been challenging. And to me, as a citizen, as father of a young daughter, I'm just very concerned about where we're going. Now, that's nothing new, right? I mean, every generation for the past 200 years of this country has probably felt this way. But I just found myself getting really caught up in a lot of this, kind of what you just mentioned here when you talked to your friend about wishing something bad to happen to somebody just in an unguarded moment. But I find myself lacking the grace to just try to accept people where they are and understand that not everyone is going to agree with me about how things are supposed to go. And that me giving into a lot of these kind of things like you just mentioned that you kind of said that day, it's like me drinking poison and expecting them to get sick or die. It's not good for me to do this. It's graceless. Right. Is that a fair thing? Is that grace?
Absolutely fair. You've given the definition that Annie Lamott frequently will use about craziness and insanity, which is taking rat poison yourself and waiting for the rat to die. That's what it means to live in an unforgiving spirit. I think that there's a couple of things that you can do practically, or that are practically oriented. There's this capacity that we have to really empathize and never underestimate the burdens that people are carrying. It may be when somebody impacts you negatively, does something that you really abhor, you kind of wonder what kind of burdens are they carrying? Just to ask that question of yourself and of them. The second thing is in education circles all across this country, in social work milieus, the question is not what we almost always go to, which is, what's wrong with you? What's the matter with you? Or is to say, trauma-informed cares teaches us to ask the first question to be, what happened to you? Not what's wrong with you, what's the matter with you, but what happened to you? And to ask that question. If somebody is really acting out and really being hateful, I've tried to imagine, if they could ever hear it, to say, could you tell me what happened to you to bring you to that position and what you just said? Tell me what happened to you. And if they don't take it up, then we can't have a conversation. But if they do take it up, maybe we can find some common ground. Maybe we can have a little bit less venom and bile.
Yeah, there's a comedian, actress, Sarah Silverman, who she was getting some very disgusting things thrown at her on Twitter by a guy just out of nowhere, just really vile. And instead of blocking him or answering back in kind, she basically, and I'm sorry, I don't have the exact wording, this has been a couple of years ago, she basically did, Bob, what you're suggesting. She basically said, who hurt you? What happened to you? How can I help you? And it turned out the guy was solely disarmed by this. I'm just breaking this down. It had, it was a thread. Turned out he was in chronic pain. He had an illness. He couldn't afford to get it looked at. All this. She helped him get the help he needed. And that's just one of those things. that I work on, because, my own upbringing, my own situation is that I've really had to try. I believe I'm an empathetic person, Bob, but I think sometimes though when I feel attacked, the empathy goes out the window. So it's tougher for me to do what Sarah did and what you're talking about, like when I'm angry. And the problem I'm running into with trying to be in a grace position here is that all the stuff that we get, all the inputs, right, from social media, news media, all this stuff, it activates me in a way that makes me sharp elbowed and unpleasant even to myself at times. And I just wonder, is it something I've got to practice?
Yes, you have to practice. And one thing I would suggest that you practice is practicing an attitude of gratitude, literally saying thanks out loud. Now, I do it with the assumption that I'm speaking with God. I did it in the elevator this morning, coming up to my apartment, about the occasion for which I was grateful. And I just said, thank you. I've done it as I've been on the balcony looking over the Country Club Plaza and the beauty of the urban scene. Now, somebody else who doesn't like cities, who likes just countryside, they might not have as much gratitude as I do for that. I think it can be as shallow as saying thank you after a Chiefs win. We're very grateful that they won. but I think that it can be, if you regularly will discipline, if one will discipline oneself, when you look at your children, when you taste a piece of pecan pie, when you take another breath in the morning, when you get all that fur off your teeth, from brushing your teeth. Literally, it is the daily things. It is the ordinary days in which we can experience extraordinary times, which is one section of the new book that I have out in those collection of sermons. But not just trying to hawk the book, although one does not want people to neglect and boycott the book. We don't want that.
Bob, don't worry. We're going to get to the book.
It is a daily practice that in the last few years, I've begun to literally do those kinds of spiritual exercises out loud, saying thank you. Another one is when somebody asks me to pray for them, I almost always ask, you mean right now? You want me to do it right now verbally? I will do that. And I'm not hesitant. It's not just because I'm a professional Christian, which is what one definition of a clergy person is. No, it's a calling that I believe works. How does it work? In a mysterious way. Does it work? Yes. Does it work every time? I have no idea. But I do pray out loud when somebody asks me to pray, or if somebody on Facebook asks me, would you please pray for me? In a private message or even public, I said, I'll pray for you, holding you in my prayers right now. And then I will pray their name out loud right then. I believe it's a discipline that keeps me centered in some way that is beyond my comprehension. But I know at the end of the day, like George Nakashima said, you want to do your work in such a way that you can go to sleep at night with an honest face, that you've left it all on the field, that you've tried your best, that you've accentuated the positive. To quote not only a great song, but a great sermon by a person who became famous. So at any rate, those are some suggestions I would have, is to say your thanks out loud. And by the way, you can't do it in the middle of a restaurant. I mean, you could, but don't do that. I mean, but when you're by yourself, if
Right.
you're driving in the car or you're taking a walk through the neighborhood, where people won't think you're nuts, you can say it out loud and talk it out.
I was out on the banks of the Missouri River at English Landing Park this morning, doing some other work just to enjoy this wonderful weather. And I found myself, Bob, true story, thanking for this wonderful weather. I was thankful. I actually said out loud without even thinking, Bob, not in trying to practice what you're telling me to preach. It just came out. I just said, Lord, I love this weather. This is so great. Thank you. I said that. So,
well, if you will, every time you have that impulse,
yeah,
if you will act on it, it will become not like a practice, a discipline where you're trying so earnestly to be righteous and good. It'll become part of the tissue, the existential tissue of your life. It'll become natural. It'll become almost automatic, autonomic.
Well, I look forward to that. I'll work on that. In Life is to be Celebrated, Selected Sermons, Messages for the 21st Century. You are presenting 52 messages. As we say, we're talking about the book, do you question how it's possible for life to be affirming, religion to be relevant, and our daily human journey to be full of hope in times riddled with division, cynicism, and negativity? And that's where we said, if so, Robert Lee Hill has 52 messages for you. We call them sermons, and I want to ask you a question. That's a question you actually answer in the beginning of the book, Bob. Who is a sermon for?
Well, it's certainly for the listeners who are in a congregation normally, sometimes on Sunday mornings. As I found out when I looked at the dating of these sermons, they were preached on every day of the week. That's partly because if you preach on Christmas Eve is a movable feast, meaning the numbers are set, it's a set day, but the days of the week move. Easter is a movable feast because it's a lunar calendar related holiday. It goes according to when the first full moon after that equinox in the spring happens, then you have Easter. Christmas happens on the 25th of December, but the 25th of December doesn't happen on a fixed day of the week because we have odd numbers of days. So it happens on a Monday, it happens on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So because of that, and because Easter is a movable feast, all the days got jumbled up. For me, when I didn't preach just on Sunday, preached on different days of the week, normally with a congregation, either at Community Christian Church or in an ecumenical setting, or in one case, in one sermon in this book, in a Jewish congregation, where I was asked to preach on a Friday night. And so it's normally a congregation. A congregation, according to Jesus, was two or more. Wherever two or more are gathered, there I am in the midst of them. Most of the congregations were much larger than that. Some of them were ecumenical. I preached before a Unitarian church and a Disciples church, a very eclectic group on the top of a mountain in New Mexico. And this was it's a summer community up in Idlewild near Eagle's Nest in New Mexico. And I've been a guest preacher there several times, and this is one of the sermons that I preached up there. And so it's usually to a congregation. But one is also given a gift, not so much the preaching, but the preparation is a gift to the preacher. It is part of the spiritual disciplines of discovering of all the nuances of the divine and of one's own existential position in relationship to the divine. One could also say, and I don't know whether you're leading me to highlight this, one could say that one person, one entity, one presence listening is God, God's self. And one might want to, if you're a preacher, you might want to think about that the next time before you open your mouth. Is what I'm saying going to be interesting to the divine? Is it going to honor the divine's presence, about which I'm trying to highlight some feature or some aspect or some new thing, some new angle?
Well, you clearly do. And I was going through the book. Of course, I'm pretty intimately aware of most of its contents, having helped you out a little bit on some of this. But, there's one thing that the focusing on 2 Corinthians, it's talking about overcoming the hell of hatred. And this was really, I don't remember hearing you give this sermon, but you read this sermon, Bob, and you're rather direct about people who were homophobic and Islamophobic.
Yeah. Those are the two biggest phobias that we were dealing with at that time.
Right.
And we must stand in contradistinction to people who claim to be Christian or claim to be righteous or claim to be holy and say some things that are just absolutely filled with hate. My interpretation and reading and experience of Jesus of Nazareth, this Rabbi Carpenter, is he was never full of hate. He did not predominate on that hellish experience, but rather emphasize and always toward the heavenly aspects of love and grace. And so, but if hatred is being expressed, and if there is this hellish experience of enmity and adversarial domination of somebody who's different, whether by virtue of religion or their sexual orientation or the rest, we must stand up. And that will be a good moment to test your character. By the way, that goes back to that George Nakashima quote, to do our work in such a way, to stand up in such a way that we can go to sleep at night with an honest face, that we said who we were and we did not let hatred have its way in the world. We need more people. I'm not alone, and I've been inspired by people. I had a mentor who went to Selma and didn't know if he was going to have a job when he got back to his church. He did. They did not fire him, but he went to Selma to march with Dr. King. And if you have mentors like that, and you understand that from time to time you do lose some things, you lose some friends, you lose jobs, you lose some arguments, but you may win your life. And so that's what I would suggest. And you were part of Community Christian Church a while back, and you would have to talk with the rest of that community to say, how did it feel to be challenged, was your word, I think, or you were saying that I was rather blunt or forthright. After a while, I'm not sure they really called it bluntness. I think they just said, oh, that's the way he preaches. So the other thing is to not do it in a hateful way. You can be blunt, you can be straightforward.
Yeah.
But preaching that is done out of a core of love. The great prophets of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the 8th century prophets before the birth of Christ, before this common era of which we are now a part, 2 millennia, they loved the people. That's why they were so adamant, so on fire. Jeremiah said he had a fire shut up in his bones. Amos said, I hate, I loathe, I despise your feast and your ceremonies. Well, he did that because he loved the people so much. He didn't do it because he was trying to put them down. He was trying to call them to their best selves.
Well, and you've got to get their attention, don't you?
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, you don't preach that every Sunday.
Right. You're going to drive them. You're going to drive people away if you do, right?
Well, there's another sermon in there called "God Wants You to Laugh."
I was just going there. Go.
You can do both. You do need to talk about the hell of hatred, but you need to lift up the need for laughter, that we were meant for joy. The Psalm says, weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning. And we need to, that's just not consolation. That's a oomph to say, get ready for the party. One of my heroes, a guy who writes about red letter Christians and was a great preacher himself, is Tony Campolo. Talks about the kingdom of God is a party. And one of his most famous declarations and proclamations is about that very thesis. So I'm in that camp. Get me to the party. I want to get there.
Yeah, one of your more endearing words you use when you're excited about something, by the way. And again, you told me the other day, I'm from Texas, but not of Texas. But you say, giddy
That's
up.
correct. Giddy up, that's right.
Giddy up. And I mean,
Yeah,
that's
giddy
something
up.
you said.
Yeah, you know, it's urgency,
Right.
but without being emergency oriented. It's urgency, but also, let's party on.
Yeah, okay, I want to ask you on behalf of the people who are listening who may not be of faith.
Sure.
Now, when we talked about the sermon about hell earlier, you had alluded to that most of our conception of what hell is colored by Dante and Blake and those kinds of things. I want to ask you a two-part question first, and this is an easy one for you there, Reverend. What is hell actually?
Hell is pretty much separation from that which is holy and good and righteous and loving. And that's a classical definition. It's separation, alienation from God. I was throwing in some definitions and synonyms for the experience of the divine, just so that there can be a hearing. Sometimes people say, if you talk about hell at all, then I will not listen to you talk about anything else. Well, I think that people have been to hell. They don't have to die.
Yeah.
They know what it is to be without food, to be evicted, to be without a job, to go through a divorce, to have the most precious person in their life contract cancer. They know what hell is all about. Absolutely. And so to honor that, we need to be sensitive to it and say, hang on there. Don't throw the whole engagement with the holy out because somebody is talking about hell. See how they're talking about it. And if they include in there to say, as one of my heroes, William Sloane Coffin, talks about how he's seen miracles. He's seen 6 packs of beer turned into furniture. When somebody decided to sober up and not drink, 3 6-packs every night, they had some money later for some furniture. That's no less a miracle than the loaves and the fishes transformation in the New Testament. I would argue that it's very similar, if not on the same plane. You talk to people who've been in recovery and been through the hell of addiction, or the families who have accompanied those who have been addicted, they can talk about hell immediately. And they can also talk about the heavenly experience that happens once somebody decides that they don't have power over that and that they have invited the serenity of the divine into their lives, so that they can accept some things about themselves and about life so they can move forward in a much more productive way.
Yeah. So do you have, okay, and I appreciate this. And I grew up in a different tradition, religious tradition, where hell was very, very much the fire and the brimstone and all the thing. It was a major, eventually became kind of a turnoff for me because I didn't have it presented to me the way you just did.
Sure.
So it became very easy to turn my back on all of it. You already kind of alluded to people like that. I was one of those people. I'm not terribly original. So I was going to say, though, what do you say to people, though, who are like, hey, listen, Bob, you sound like a nice man and you're doing great works for our community, but I just don't feel called to God. I don't know if there is a God. It's just not for me. Is there any reason, one, for them to read your book, first of all, and two, if so, what might they find there?
What I would suggest is read the book and read it however you want to read it, haphazardly, jumping around. But notice where some of the sermons are located in the book. There's a section about ordinary days and extraordinary times. There's another thing that talks about the 2 major festivals of the Christian calendar, which is Advent to Christmas and then Ashes to Easter. Those are the 2 high holiest days on the Christian calendar. Then check out the justice sermons. Some people who are very justice oriented think that religion these days has very little to say to that topic. I beg to differ and think that religion has a lot to say about justice. Check out 1 or 2 of those sermons. If you want to see what one preacher's take is on immigration, check out the sermon on entertaining angels from a text in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. Show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. So check that one out. And then if you want to look at kind of some signature sermons of somebody who was in a pulpit for a long time and managed to stay in a pulpit, I often will tell people, they say, how long were you at Community? I said, I was there so long, people were sure I couldn't get another job, And so but I was privileged, I was graced to have met a moment and a history and a congregation that I fit in very well, and had a productive season of ministry there. And what I was going to say is check out those sermons, but then find a community of faith that could be to your liking. You don't know, give yourself a trial period of 3 or 4 months. Go church shopping, and by the way, everybody does it. Mm-hmm. And no one would be surprised if you drop in, because that's what people do these days, either online or in person, if it's appropriate for you to do that. And then check out and see if there's a word of hope that you receive in that experience, a word of hope that fills your tank a little bit more than it was before the experience. I used to resist the stereotype of a church or a religious community being a filling station where you went in to get gassed up in a good way with fuel for the living of your days. That's not too far off from really what happens. One goes to a religious community and has the experience and then can live more fulfillingly. One person came to Community one time, and they hadn't darkened the door of the church for a long time. I mean, they've been to some funerals, they've been in some weddings, etc. And then they adopted a baby. And then they got pregnant. That's not an uncommon experience for families that are trying to adopt. They got pregnant with their second child. And all of a sudden they showed up at church. And I asked Sarah, that's her name. I've gotten permission to tell her story. I won't say her last name, but one day I just said, Sarah, let me just ask you a question. I'm curious. You came and you stayed here at Community, but why did you come in the first place after being away from a religious community for so many years? And she goes, well, I just had to have somebody to thank. So out of gratitude for her children, she had to connect to a community and to a dimension of life that she felt was pretty much responsible for her being graced in a profoundly fundamental way that made all the difference in her life.
And what do you have to lose, right? Check it. I mean, just to be very blunt about it, right? Just go check it.
Yeah, you're talking about Pascal's wager. Philosophically, Pascal's wager was, well, kind of play like it's about God. And if it isn't, then you have nothing to lose. And if it is, oh, look at that. That, by the way, still has a little bit of what you've talked about earlier about fire and brimstone preaching, the wrong kind.
Yeah.
The wrong kind of fire and brimstone, there's a right kind, but the wrong kind of fire and brimstone preaching predominates on hate and the supremacy of one particular sliver of an interpretation of a text or the world or life itself, and says, this must dominate, this must win. And that fear foundation is not Christian. It's not part of the Judeo-Christian heritage. Is fear of deity what we want to emphasize? That makes God into a monster. And so frequently people will say, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in God. And I often want to say, tell me what kind of God you don't believe in. I bet I don't believe in that kind of God either. I'm not original with that. Many pastors have said that and used that effectively. And I'm not using it as a trick. That's
Right.
a real, genuine engagement question.
Right.
To say, tell me the kind of God you don't believe in. I probably don't believe in that God either. Then we can talk about maybe a God we could believe in.
You know, the Ronald J. Allen, professor of preaching and gospels and letters, emeritus Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, in the foreword of this book says, if there were a hall of fame for preachers, Robert Lee Hill would certainly be included. These 52 sermons exhibit the best of contemporary preaching with respect to spirit, theological acuity, timeliness, concern for justice, human insight, homiletical variety, evocative language, and poetry. And I could not agree more. And I'm one of those people, by the way, Bob, who jumps around in this book. And the great thing about books by Bob Hill are that they don't go on your shelf. They go beside your bed, or they go in your study, or they go by your favorite chair. And I want to tell you something, Bob. You know me pretty well. Every now and then I get a little down and or whatever, and I will often reach for this good book or actually previous good books. I just want you to know that. But life is to be celebrated. Ultimately, in my opinion, is just what it says. It is a celebration of life, and it's a celebration of intelligent, thoughtful, kind Christianity, and beyond that, as Bob has said, he's very ecumenical, and I've always admired that about you, Bob. The fact that your message translates no matter what pulpit you're standing in.
Thank you. You're very gracious. Now your kindness and generosity has outstripped your judgment.
That, and he's a much quicker wit than I am. Bob Hill, the book is Life is to be Celebrated, Selected Sermons, Messages for the 21st Century. It is a Caroline Street Press book. You can get it, guess what, just about all over Amazon, of course. You can get a paperback, you can get an ebook. Also, Bob, you might here and there be doing some speakings around the Kansas City area.
Yeah, right. And you'll hear about it on Facebook, probably in an email. If people want to write me and say, put me on your email blast, it's Dr. Robert Lee Hill at gmail.com. Dr. Dr. It's long, presumptuous sounding, but it's pretty understandable at the end. So my whole name, Dr. Robert Lee Hill at gmail.com.
That's right. And of course, you also have a blog.
Yes, I infrequently post there, but I do from time to time. And I can't even tell you the call letters for it unless you have it there.
I've got it. It's A View from the Hill, and it's revhill.wordpress.com. And don't worry, folks. Don't stop driving and pull over. Don't get off the treadmill. Don't get off your bicycle. I tell you what, just go to mgopod.com or look in your show notes, and you'll find links where to buy this book, to his blog, and more. And Bob Hill, I'm going to give you the last word because only a fool would try to top you.
No.
Any last thoughts before we say goodbye for now?
Somebody would ask me, what is the gist of what I've tried to preach and what I've tried to live very poorly, admittedly. And the longer we live, we understand how poorly we live it. Age is a kind of invitation to humility, I think, always. But if I had to sum it up, I would say from a Christian perspective, and I'm a Christian pastor, Jesus gives us a way of life replete with opportunities and possibilities for reconciliation, joy, justice, grace, love, empathy, transformation. And then he bids us to give that way of life away to others. So that's as proselytizing as I'm going to get, all right? Period. But I will say also the last sermon in the collection is a sermon called Surrounded. And I do believe that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses and a great kind of conundrum of mysterious, wondrous powers that are at our disposal, and that we only need to open the door, open the window, open our eyes, open our hearts, and let it in.
Not even going to try to top that. That's beautiful. Bob Hill, thanks again for joining us on Mysterious Goings On.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much.
You know, I love podcasting. I have since 2006, back when you had to use like a Dixie cup with string to make the thing work. And that's why I'm so excited that we recently moved Mysterious Goings On to Anchor FM to record our podcast. I gotta tell you, I don't regret it a bit. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. I'm not going to lie to you, when I first heard about Anchor, I was a little dubious because I've been doing it the hard way for so long. But I got to tell you, it's very easy. Use a Stripe account. Get sponsors. You're not paying monthly hosting fees. The sound quality is great. The distribution is phenomenal. Friends, download the free Anchor app today if you want to start your own podcast, or go to anchor.fm to get started. Remember, you heard it here first on Mysterious Goings On. Thanks so much for listening to Mysterious Goings On. Don't forget, we have a complete archive of all of our interviews, monologues, updates, live readings, dead readings. All of that stuff is available at mgopod.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to us so you never miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual suspects. Please join us there. Again, don't forget, mgopod.com also has links where to find me on social media and how to get in touch in case you want to be a guest here on the show. Well, I think it's time that I move on for this week, but until next time, keep reading.